All right, we're back with the great consciousness debates. Still got my sunless tea, almost gone. Time for a should have refilled it in the last break. Oy. What are you gonna do? Okay, so we've been talking about this for a while now. This is like the sixth part of this. I didn't realize it was a 2-hour discussion at the end of their talks. Been very interesting. I've been enjoying it. I don't know when this will be up, but if you're watching this, be sure to check out the live discussions that I have going. I should be talking with Eric Switchkable on the 29th. I've got Steve Fleming coming up in February, talking about the science of metacognition. He's this guy over here, right here, this guy. And then Matthias Michel and Ned Block are coming up as well, hopefully in February. I'm still waiting to hear back from people. Some people have said no, some people have said not really, too busy, whatever. So, I'm always sending out invitations. If you have someone you think I should reach out to, let me know. All right, so we're here. Then this should be the end. Liad said this was the last question, I think, that she's going to ask the panel. So let's jump in.
You know what? Maybe we could come up with actual experiments.
Oh, I see.
High order theory that works together.
Okay, but isn't that then exactly?
Okay, so now that we settled that, I want to take advantage of the last 30 minutes in order to ask maybe the hardest question. And we all said that it would be great if we could come up with actual experiments that would test these theories and even compare between them. And this is what people have been trying to do, especially in recent years. So what would make you change your mind? So what result, what finding would make you say, you know what, maybe I got it wrong?
Okay, so who's going to start?
Looking at me.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Yeah, she was looking. So Stan goes first. So what would make you change your mind on global workspace theory?
Well, it's a very nice question. I was thinking hard about it and trying to be honest about it. And I think it's this hidden assumption that there is really one central state of consciousness. And that's really central to the global workspace idea. There's one at a time, and maybe 200 milliseconds later you can have another one. But for a given moment, if you have one, you don't have others. And I could see experiments that might disprove that. Maybe we are wrong, maybe Victor is closer to the truth, maybe we underestimate once again the parallel processing in the brain, and maybe there is more than one central state or central sharing system in the brain. So I'm not sure exactly what experiments to do with that, and I could see also the flip side of this coin, which is I think this is potentially a severe criticism to Victor as well. So maybe let's push the hot potato somewhere else. But because I do see that as a problem. If you have loops within the visual system, well, you think this is the visual consciousness, but what happens to the other cortices? Are they also able to have their own loops? Like maybe the auditory cortex has its own loops, right? And do they have a second consciousness at the same time? From all we know, and that's really the central core hypothesis of the global workspace, is that we really have one state at a time. And the experiment is that if you attend to audition, you really cannot perceive a competing visual stimulus at the same time. So what happens in your theory, Victor? Is it possible to have multiple such loops in different systems? And
yeah, it's a good point, because recurrent processing in the visual cortex, recurrent processing in the auditory cortex, those got to be joined together somehow. So can they be separated? And I like Stan was being very open and honest that the view is committed to there being one kind of conscious state at a time. How you would test for that, very interesting idea. This gets at the question of unity as well, because how do we know, like, for example, if there are these loops that are occurring, but they're not like connected to each other, are there separated consciousnesses? IIT is going to say no. Then we needed some reason to think about that. So these are all very perplexing, interesting issues. This is exactly the kind of discussion I think that we need to be having more of, different representatives of different theories getting together rather than people in talking. So these discussions are very helpful in my opinion.
all of these consciousnesses are running at the same time?
Multiple draft?
Multiple drafts.
Yeah, something
Well,
like
the multiple drafts, the idea is that there's still one
Yeah, one final outcome.
outcome at a given moment.
Well, certainly, if you have...
Well, hold on. Dennis multiple drafts had it that there was no really any determinate thing. There were multiple of these things until you asked. Then you got one of them that was dominant at the time that gave you the output. Now that there are multiple consciousnesses, so you could have a version of multiple drafts where they were all conscious. I think someone did have that, actually. Was it, I think Luke Roloff, the philosopher, developed something like this, a kind of total panpsychist version of multiple drafts. Okay, anyway.
Something
Well, the multiple drafts, the idea is that there's still one
final
outcome at a given moment.
Well, certainly, if you have vision versus audition, of course, normally they get synchronized and integrated, that you see and hear at the same time.
But how, if it's all local, how are they synchronized and integrated? Now the question strikes me. No, really. Like now everyone's seeing me, so they have, let's say, recurrent processing of, the way my lips move, and they hear me, so they have...
Now we're talking multisensory integration, and that's parietal cortex stuff. I know very little about that, actually, but it's something along those lines. But there, too, you can have multisensory integration, I think, without having access or report of that.
No, but I think that Stan's question is, it's a hard one, right? So if you have, multiple loops.
Wasn't that question actually what would criticize?
Yeah, but we will get back to him.
But I did my bit.
No worries. But you think he's very clever, questions to depress you, right? So.
But I see it as a criticism of my work. If you can show that there are multiple loops in different areas at the same time, and somehow you could prove, I think you can't, but if you could prove that there are multiple phenomenological states at the same time, that would be a very severe criticism of global workspace and any global integration theory, basically.
Okay, but how would we...
And I think you believe in that.
How would we then prove that there are different phenomenological states?
Well, but that's your problem. That's your problem from the beginning.
But let's go back to the hard question. The hard question is, if you have multiple loops in auditory cortices, in somatosensory, in visual, in vision, then how many consciousness do you have? What is the unification?
Exactly.
And so on. So I think that's the simplest and hardest question.
Yes. Well, then you have, indeed, if they're not interconnected, which I think...
But for your theory, it doesn't matter because...
Which would be very difficult. Then indeed you have separate audition and vision, which is, of course...
So I need a recurrency between V1 and STG? Something like that?
No, I think he was saying that you have separate conscious experiences
now I'm lost.
I think what he said was that if these processes are disconnected from each other, then yes, you could have visual experience separate from auditory experience. But in the brain, they're actually interconnected in a way that they aren't. So, I don't know if he's really answering the question, which is, how do you get a kind of unified experience? That's what she was talking about, the unity of experience. They see her and hear her voice. So the visual experience and the auditory experience have to be joined to the same person, place, whatever. They are separate in the brain. They each consist of these recurrent feedback loops, according to Victor. So how do they get joined together? He seems to sort of be dismissing the question as just like, well, A is conscious, B is conscious. So if they're there and connected, then you have A and B conscious. Is that the idea that you don't really need any special way of joining them because they're just conjointly things that are present because the brain is connected in this way? I think that's what the gist of his response, basically.
Let's make it very simple. I want to give you an example. You're driving your car, listening to the radio. From all that you told us so far, you're still phenomenologically conscious of the driving, the visual part of the driving, because you have these loops, it's all being processed and so on. And yet you are listening to the radio. So you're also, and I would argue, more conscious of the radio, because that's what you're attending to. So,
agree.
So you have two consciousness at the same time. It seems to me this is really a problem for what you're...
So you're saying yes?
You're saying yes.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And then when I'm, also this.
You have two consciousness at the same time, but one is not conscious.
That's what you're saying.
So
I think he's saying you have the two aspects of your experience and you're not aware of one or something like that. So we use the word conscious in different ways. One means aware, like your mental state of what you're aware. The other is this phenomenal sense. So Victor's saying they're phenomenally conscious, but not, you're not aware of them. So, yeah, interesting. Are they really disagreeing here, though? So I guess what Stan is saying is that if you don't have like one state, which is in the global workspace, on his view, which is unified. So on Victor's view, you have some stuff in the global workspace that's conscious, and then some stuff that isn't really in the global workspace that's also phenomenally conscious. So that's what he means by the two consciousnesses, I think. It's an interesting discussion. I wish Victor would say more. Victor's not really responding. He's kind of being flippant and glib. I wish he would actually address the issue. I wonder if it's just because he doesn't have anything to say about it.
So I want to also...
the driving of course the driving example I think is really an example of a failure of memory instead of.
So he's just thinking about it. As he gave him a second to think and he has something to say. So a failure of memory, huh? So the person. So when they say they're not conscious of it, he's responding to this little jab at him. I think. They're not conscious of it. They just forgot it. They was there, then they forgot it. So it's not like there's two consciousnesses. It's just something that was there that they don't remember later. I think that's technically Victor's line. Yeah.
Terminology. When you say, I mean, it's so. Of course,
but it does get to be the point where it sort of seems like Victor's just like, okay, I'll say whatever it takes. You're not going to convince me. I wonder what he's going to say about what would convince him. I bet. I'm not gonna bet.
Driving example, I think, is really an example of a failure of memory instead of phenomenology. When you say, I mean, it's so weird, actually, totally weird to say to people, you were driving without seeing what you were doing. I mean,
it's also weird to say to someone who say, I don't see it, you do see it.
I mean, why can't a lot of it be unconscious vision? I mean, a tennis player can respond very quickly without knowing how they've responded to a very fast serve.
That's feed-forward stuff, by the way.
No,
but it actually is.
Yes, but psychologically, why do we have to admit one case and not the other? I think the driving example has derailed everything.
Because there are good, as I tried to explain, there are good scientific reasons, well, to go my way.
But to pick up on
but I mean, for one thing, if we talk about, I think vision is very much about perceptual organization. How do higher order thoughts explain perceptual organization? I don't see how. How does global workspace explain perceptual organization? They don't. So that critical aspect.
Yeah, well, they're not trying to. They're trying to explain your awareness of it or consciousness of it. So Victor is conflating perception with consciousness. Higher order theorists think you could have consciousness, and then you need to explain perception, and then you need to explain consciousness. I'm not saying I agree. I mean, I wrote a whole book about how I think this stuff is tricky. So I think it's pretty tricky, but I don't think Victor's quite being fair there either.
Of vision, which is the most, maybe combined to next to integration, and integration is very similar, of course, in that sense. And many, by the way, of these fundamental aspects of consciousness that IIT postulates. How do these theories explain those? I really don't.
Actually, I think that for me this was a key turning point when I.
Yeah, but hold on, he's just deflecting. So they asked him a question based on his theory. If it's recurrent processing and you have it in the visual area, and there's recurrent processing, you have it in the auditory area, then how do these things get linked? Do they have to have recurrent processing between the two? I think that's what Liad was asking. Or was it Lucia? I forget. Whoever, I think it was Liad. Do they have to be linked? He was sort of dismissive of that. But, I mean, shouldn't his theory have an answer to that? And then he says, well, how do these other theories explain their things? So plain whataboutism. But that's not a good, I mean, Yeah, I'm not satisfied with that. Let's hear Stan. Talk some sense into these people, Stan.
In that sense, and many, by the way, of these fundamental aspects of consciousness that IIT postulates. How do these theories explain those?
But
I
let me-
really don't.
Actually, I think that for me this was a key turning point when I read Bernard Barr's book, which I still recommend. I think it's a very good book, and I suddenly realized that the problem of consciousness was not the problem of everything about the brain. So the problem of consciousness is not the problem of perceptual organization. The problem is the problem of conscious perceptual organization. There's a lot of perceptual.
He said the problem of consciousness is not the problem of everything in the brain. Bars, I think, the book In the Theater of Consciousness or something, Cognitive Theory of Consciousness. I don't know, Bars is a couple. I had him on Consciousness Live a while back. Somewhat disappointing conversation, actually, but he's an interesting guy. Okay, so yeah, right. So even global workspace theory is going to say, well, look, we don't want to explain those. We want to explain how that stuff becomes conscious. Like, so you have that, and then how does it become conscious? The idea is that you could have that without consciousness, or that that by itself doesn't explain consciousness, at least. And I think that's what's common between these gentlemen, Steve and Stan. And these guys don't think that. They think if you explain the content, then that's got to be partially wrapped up in your explanation of consciousness. And so this is a real fundamental divide, which is why I don't think you should ignore higher order theories. I mean, everybody sort of has an intuition about this, about whether... well, anyway, so let's hear how they talk about it. Yeah.
Which are going without consciousness, and that's fine, and that's a whole field, and your experiments are beautiful, the work with Peter Hofstadter and so on, but they don't have to do with consciousness necessarily. And in fact, the problem of consciousness is relatively localized. It's not the problem of the whole brain.
But I do want to also, make it a bit harder.
Does Victor get to say anything back? Hello. Oh, this is hilarious. I would love to have these two gentlemen, both on Consciousness Live, sitting virtually across from each other to have a discussion with me in the middle, perhaps. That would be a fun conversation. I think Stan's too famous to be contacted. I don't know, actually, how to get a hold of him, but Victor never responds to emails. But I wonder if they would be open to that. That would be fun.
For you, asking if the experiment you suggested is a non-feasible one. Like, how can I show that there are multiple consciousnesses at the same time? Like, if it's not a test that I could actually run, then,
No, it could be.
But what about in the split brain? So in that case,
Sure, but in this case, there could be two consciousnesses, right? And look like it's like that. Right? Yeah.
So does that mean...
But there too,
split brain's a hard case already, and so that's okay. So hold on.
Two consciousnesses, right? And look like it's like that. Right? Yeah.
So does that mean...
But there too, the person will say, "That's just one."
No, the right hemisphere may report by pointing that there is another
Yeah, but
report.
then you get to the issue. What do you consider evidence of having a conscious experience? Is it, in that case, it's the pointing? But in blindsight, we don't consider pointing evidence of conscious experience, for example.
It is extremely different, honestly, than a split brain.
But
the blind sight shouldn't be overrated.
One of the main points I'm always trying to make is that much of this whole debate is very much about what we consider evidence of having a conscious experience. And as long as we don't agree on that, and I just think we don't, then we will keep having these debates.
It's true, because some people think you got to say you saw it in order for you to believe that the person experienced it, whereas Victor doesn't believe that. So that's why in the experiments that we set up, I try to give him everything that he wanted. So, and even so, I think there's going to be evidence, hopefully, that goes my way. I mean, not really. Things never work out my way, so I'm expecting it not to go my way. But if it did, the best kind of evidence you could have is when you grant them this. So he doesn't think working memory is going to be involved. I say, great. There might still be a kind of experience that depends on higher order awareness that's outside working memory and outside all of the stuff that you think is the global workspace. So let's check for that before we say it's ridiculous. So I agree that when you really can't, when two camps disagree so strongly about what counts as evidence of consciousness. Victor thinks certain behaviors are going to count, whereas he's not going to count those behaviors. Like, for instance, when the person can press the button indicating what it was, but says they don't see it. Now, whether blind sight is different than this, so yeah, one's got a cut between the corpus callosum, one has damage to the visual areas. But nonetheless, Victor's point is a good one, I think, and one that people don't really address often enough. So it's good, yes.
Yeah, so just to have enough time.
So what's your criterion for having a conscious experience? That's whether, and in your case, it's things like access and reportability, and also tied to attention, working memory. In your case, it's higher order thoughts. I mean, that's all fine, but why are these the criteria? In my case, obviously, it's more like perceptual organization and stuff like that. Well, why do we have these different criteria? And how do we arbitrate between them? Because we can do experiments till our socks wear off. That won't solve that issue.
I think you summarized the point.
What are the minimal properties that then any theory should explain? Let's agree now on those. So what I heard is like, we're going to be in this debate forever, unless we say, okay, let's agree on one at least, that every theory needs to explain.
Well, didn't we do that in the first half?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't in terms of what is the minimal properties of consciousness that we need to explain. But this goes back to, like, so you could say, like, in IAT, there is 5, like, so
5 plus 1.
5 plus
Existence.
Yeah.
6.
Yeah. So,
I thought yours is more of an empirical question. Like, how do we design the right empirical test?
No. It's about terminology ultimately.
Exactly,
so
no.
what do you consider? What do you consider state of consciousness?
How do you define consciousness? What is, again, going back to the question, what is the explanandum? What are we trying to explain?
I thought we went through that in the first half.
Yeah, so but just so we have time, let's go again to the question of experiment. So what would falsify or change your mind?
So a different question now.
Yes. No, so it's the question that Stan answered, right? So
Okay.
what experiment or finding would change your mind?
Just to re-answer the first question, I think for me, it's the functional cluster of these properties and I don't think there's going to be one empirical test. And I think this is where we often come unstuck. That, for me, if there's a functional cluster of properties that, we can assay with tasks and metrics like meta D prime and so on, that we can start getting a handle on it. But I think a lot of these talking past each other comes from saying we've got like this one criterion point, and that's where we're going to differ. So
Meta D prime is actually something Håkon and Steve helped come up with, which is so D prime is a measure of basically of how accurate you are with respect to external information, so how good you are detecting something. Meta D prime is your ability to detect how good you are at detecting something, so it's meta. But it can still be mathematically computed, and so it is, what he's saying is that if we have mathematical models, then we can generate experiments. So I sort of agree, in a sense, I agree that a theory of consciousness is going to lead us to interesting questions, and the one that's successful is going to be the one that generates an interesting research program, and ones that are unsuccessful are just going to kind of fall by the wayside because they're not able to do that. So higher order theories are just now on that point where we're trying to spin them out into such a way. But ultimately, these 4 people here, all coming from very different theoretical backgrounds, I don't think any of them ever going to change their minds. I mean, there's that old cynical quip that science proceeds one funeral at a time. Not that I'm wishing any particular ill will, obviously, but the joke being that it's only when the adherents of the theory die off that we sort of go on with our lives, because there's no one there like leading the lab, focused on answering the questions in this way and stuff. So that's a bit cynical, obviously, but is there anything short of cynicism that we can say? Some people think, these adversarial collaborations are going to be importantly involved here. So I think they have the potential to move the field forward. But these sorts of debates are resolved in the hundreds of years, not in the near-term future, as I see things.
I guess I would just appeal to a plurality of measures rather than just saying we've got to have one.
And what would make you change your mind?
And what would make me change my mind? So I think that I was thinking about this a lot. I think a lot of things would make me change my mind.
Give me one.
So, yeah, because So I think that if it were possible to, in somehow, inactivate or remove the higher order level, and I don't think we're yet there yet, but hopefully we can, as we refine the model and the tasks, we might be able to get there. And then the subject still claims awareness of the content that that higher order state is in some sense pointing to, then I think we would have to reformulate.
I mean, but look.
Yeah, so this is something I've talked about, my invention of the theoretical brain clamp, sort of like a voltage clamp for keeping a neuron at a certain level activity. If you could invent a brain clamp for keeping a certain area of the brain clamped at a certain activity level, and then if you identified an area that you thought was the higher order area of the brain and just held it constant and varied the other things, or vice versa, you would expect some pretty big differences. So I didn't realize that he thought you could do this in principle. I mean, one way you might do is identify the network and TMS it and deactivate or something like that. But the idea of identifying the higher order network is we're still at the very beginning stages. We're not even sure whether it's in the prefrontal cortex, parietal cortex, or even actually in the lower visual areas you could have a higher order network instantiated. So it's not really clear how you would do this right now, but in the fullness of time, that would be cool. So if you were able to deactivate the higher order network and the person's experience didn't change, that would obviously be a big blow to the theory. Now, how could they report that, though, if that network was deactivated?
This is an experiment that one can do. So in patients that actually have epilepsy, they're going to do cooling, for instance, during surgery, right? Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, cool. Right.
Which area in prefrontal cortex should we cool?
That I think is the problem. So,
well, see, and she said prefrontal cortex, so it's not obvious that the higher order circuitry is in the prefrontal cortex. It's not obvious that it isn't. I would say we still don't really know. There's some reason to think it overlaps. I think Steve and company think there's some empirical reason to think it overlaps with the metacognition machinery in the prefrontal cortex. Other people think not. So I think it's a big area of debate. We don't really know.
I've talked quite a lot to Hak-Wan Lau about this, and I think that he's more skeptical that we could ever do this because that higher order state is a computational quantity. It's not like that brain region has the state. That I think is where it becomes more difficult.
So where is it then?
We don't know. As in, like, it's not. I don't think it's going to be in one place. Mm-hmm. I think Stan mentioned something similar, that it's a network property, and that we're not going to say it's in that region of prefrontal cortex.
Is this redundant?
That region of parietal cortex.
Yeah, so a network property, that's because they have this joint determination view. So they can't say it's in here or there. It's got to be distributed through the activity throughout that area.
It's just redundant. So you say it's a network property. Is this redundancy?
What do you mean by redundancy?
Redundancy. So you have one first order state, right? And then you have like many pointers in prefrontal that goes there. So it's just redundant. Do they add something? Because it's different, right? So if they add, then then there should be something that you can knock out.
Yeah, so
it's just redundant.
It might be possible that there's a nicely organized code in one particular brain region, and that would be nice for doing these kind of experiments. But I think that, and I'm relatively optimistic that we might be able to discover those kind of confidence codes that make the difference. But I'm just saying that other people working in this area are less optimistic. So it's all about how it's coded. And I think for that, we're going to need more mechanistic models rather than just the model that we're working with is very abstract. It's really just a few lines, a few equations, really, but it helps us refine qualitative predictions for the experiments.
So if I understand you correctly, it adds the qualitative experience of absent versus present in a way?
Well, for the model that we're working with,
for your model,
we give phenomenal magnitude.
But you don't know whether this added component is located in a specific area.
Right.
So the phenomenal magnitude idea is that it assigns a scalar value that can take a number between, let's say 1 and 0. So you could have 0.5, and then that would be kind of like, let's suppose, a hazy experience. And you can ramp that all the way up to, it's perfectly pure and clear and vivid. So that's going to be kind of like, you can imagine like a kind of dimmer or scale, a switch that you can slide up and down that is going to allow you to adjust the phenomenal magnitude or how vivid and present the experience is to you. the force of it, as some people call it, the mental force or whatever. So that's Steve's own view. That's what the Haas model, basically, higher state space model, is trying to explain. So you have the first order state, and then this thing basically it estimates its phenomenal magnitude, and that's the experience of it. You experience red in a certain way because of these two things together. Whereas Hawk-1 thinks it's not going to be as nicely coded as that, so you're not going to be able to knock it out per se, because it's not exactly saying that state has a certain property. That's an interesting view. Huh. Yeah, I'd have to think about that a little bit.
That's the claim.
Right.
Okay.
Or how it's implemented at all, really. It could be neuromodulatory. That's another interesting way to investigate it.
Oh, yeah.
Melanie, what would make you change your
For us, there's several types, I think, of evidence that would really challenge IIT that I think are feasible, and we can, again, work as a team on it.
Okay, so let's see. I didn't realize how much of this there is. There's still, before we get to the what would falsify IIT, this would be a good time to refill my sunless tea. So yeah, did Steve really say what would count as changing his mind? Yeah, I don't know if he really did. For me, I've said I put my money on the line already. I have some things that are out there already that if they came back not my way in various ways, that I would start to reevaluate. Like, I've never been a true convert of the hard approach anyway, but I certainly would reevaluate like how much time I spend arguing for it and things like that with certain empirical results. So I think these are important questions. It's good to have them all on the record. I don't know if anyone besides Stan has really answered the question. And then even he gave one that it seemed like it would be impossible to ever come up with. Yeah. On to the next.